Here's a guy who tries to make the fine-tuning argument with a goofy, nonsensical hypothetical.
You're about to see one of the most famous atheists on YouTube debate Matthew Adelstein, a theist, on whether or not the fine-tuning of the universe to allow for life to be possible is evidence for God.
If there is an all-powerful God, it wouldn't make sense for the parameters of the universe to be finely tuned to allow life to be possible, because an all-powerful God, by definition, would have the power to put life into a universe with any set of parameters. If an all-powerful God exists, life is possible without the need for anything to be finely tuned.
So Matt, suppose that the initial conditions of the universe spelled out made by God with love in every human language.
What would it mean for the conditions of the universe to spell out anything, let alone in every language? Conditions aren't letters. And how would it spell it in languages? And how would it spell it in languages that died out before writing was invented?
And suppose that we had sort of definitive scientific proof that this was not the byproduct of a limited simulator. Like, the only two possibilities were that this was a byproduct purely of chance, or that it was the byproduct of an all-powerful God.
How the hell would you establish that? How could you possibly rule out the idea that the cause is limited in power? That seems like one of those negatives that's impossible to prove. Also, why are the choices narrowed to either an all-powerful God or random chance? If I actually saw such a phenomenon, my first inference would be some cause that is neither chance nor someone all-powerful. The closest thing to God that I might infer is an alien from another universe who created this one, but who is still a finite physical entity.
Would you say that that was evidence that there was a God?
I'd say it is evidence that the universe was created by something comparable to a human, but I don't see how it could be established that the creator is all-powerful, much less capable of existing independent of all of space and time, as is commonly said of God, because I don't see such a being as even coherent.
I have no idea. In that particular hypothetical scenario, which, by the way, is not remotely what we have, I think it could be completely understandable why people would reasonably conclude that that was a message from a God. I don't understand the in every possible language. I mean, it seems like...
Sorry, I said in every human language.
How would conditions spell anything in any language? What does that even mean?
Okay, I don't know how it's possible to say. So individually, there's like a billion statements there covering every language and dialect, and they all say created with love from God.
Yeah,
and at a minimum,
you can imagine it's in really small writing.
Sure. At a minimum, that would make it seem that it's rational to conclude that there is a being capable of doing that, and that may be sufficiently close to godlike for us to not care whether it's the Omnimax God or not.
Insofar as being all-powerful is a necessary condition to the Abrahamic concept of God, it would not be evidence of such a being, because the mere fact that such conditions had to be created by something with the power to create them would in no way imply that such a being has every possible power.
But in any case, it would be really, really incredible evidence that it's more likely that there's a being capable of doing that. Whether or not it's a God is a separate thing.
Okay, and so the reason you would say that it's reasonable to conclude there's a being that can do that is because the odds of that happening by chance are super low, and the odds of it happening if there was a being who wanted to create it are super high, right?
Given that it's not clear what it would even mean for the conditions of the universe to spell anything, it's hard to estimate the odds of that happening by chance. But they would probably be lower than something analogous to a human doing it, because humans are the only known cause of language. My first inference would be that someone was tampering with the instruments that were used to detect such a message. My second inference would be that some type of physical alien from another space-time continuum did it, rather than some all-powerful supernatural being.
That's sort of the broad picture.
We can't calculate, okay? So, but it seems, given the information we have, that it is less likely for that to happen by chance than by intent. However, we only have one occurrence. And so I don't know how we determined what the odds are for any of this with one occurrence.
We might have to compare the conditions of other universes. Maybe there are millions of other universes and nothing like this appears in any of them. But maybe you see the same message in 50% of them, making the message appearing by chance much more plausible.
Okay, so follow-up. And how's that scenario different from fine-tuning? Like, in the case of the initial conditions being that way, you'd say, look, it's so unlikely it would be that way by chance.
I think there's a meaningful difference between a message being spelled out that meant the same thing in every language, and a set of conditions that don't do that, even if they are very unlikely, because other conditions are not so analogous to language that, as far as we know, only comes from human beings.
That, because even though there's no reason to expect that a God would definitely do it that way, you think maybe there's a reason a God would do it that way, and it's so unlikely to happen by chance, that a designer doing it is the best explanation.
You're arbitrarily leaving out a third option, which is that the conditions we have are the only possible ones. The mere fact that we can imagine the parameters of the universe being different is not a reason to believe they actually could be. The biggest difference between this guy's hypothetical situation and what we actually see is that in his imagined scenario, all natural causes have somehow been ruled out. In reality, we have not ruled out a naturalistic explanation for why the parameters of the universe are what they are.
So why is that different from fine-tuning, where the odds of it happening by chance are on the order of 1 in Google?
How did you calculate that exactly? This idea would have to assume that all of the other values that we can imagine for the initial conditions of the universe are equally probable, when we have no reason to believe that they're even possible. There was never a time when these values were ever free to vary.
Yeah, so the reason that a message written in every human language is less likely, let's say, let me phrase your question correctly. You're saying, why is that more acceptable than the fine tuning that you see to conclude a God?
Yep.
Because human languages are our inventions and are the result of our progress. And so to have them written in human language from the beginning of time is a completely different category of things than having life evolve to fit the physical properties of the universe in which it inhabits.
Even if the odds of the parameters of the universe being what they are were as improbable as theists would like us to believe, they're not as probably the result of an entity as comparable to a human if the evidence is a message written in human language.
Now, in just a few moments, we're going to see why Matt Dillahunty walks right into a big inconsistency. But first, notice his response to the hypothetical. If it were written made by God, though that would be ridiculously improbable, and maybe that's not even the right term, Dillahunty thinks it doesn't compare to fine-tuning arguments because those human languages wouldn't be written until much later, billions of years later, and as a result, it would be impossible for them to be there from the beginning unless there was some intelligence behind it.
No, it wouldn't be impossible, just improbable.
We'll see what Adelstein thinks about that in just a minute. But first, Dillahunty's going to try and push on this notion that perhaps life could have emerged even if the fundamental constants had been different. Adelstein presses Dillahunty to put his money where his mouth is on that suggestion.
Well, if there is an all-powerful God, then he would have the power to put life into a universe with any set of conditions.
You could change some of the constants, you could change things and have a different universe crop up where a different set of life forms would be considering how the universe was created for them. The difference between your fine-tuning and this hypothetical message is that your fine-tuning is predicated on the notion that we are the goal rather than what we are, which is what can evolve in the system.
So, Matt, what are some of the examples of fine-tuning that are cited by theists that if the constants were to be changed, do you think you could get a different kind of life? Like, for example, do you think that about the cosmological constant? Do you think that about the Higgs mass?
If there is an all-powerful God, then he would have the power to put some kind of life into a universe if any or all of the constants were different. It's only if there is no all-powerful God that it could be true that life is not possible if the constants were different. The central premise of the fine-tuning argument, that life would be impossible if the parameters of the universe were even slightly different, could only be true if an all-powerful God does not exist.
I have no idea. I'm not even convinced that those things could... I'm sorry, what?
Well, sorry. So what you just said was that, look, if you change the constants, you could get life arising under different conditions, and then there's different kinds of life. Yeah, and then you said there's different kinds of life. Then they would be wondering to themselves, "Oh, it's so surprising we got them." So I'm asking, which constants do you think you could change where you'd get different kinds of life? Do you think that about the cosmological constant? Do you think that about the Higgs mass? Which one is this true of?
Sean Carroll was asked this question by William Lane Craig, and here was his answer.
It is not at all convincing. I will give you 5 quick reasons why theism does not offer a solution to the purported fine-tuning problem. First, I am by no means convinced that there is a fine-tuning problem. And again, Dr. Craig offered no evidence for it. It is certainly true that if you change the parameters of nature, our local conditions that we observe around us would change by a lot. I grant that quickly. I do not grant that therefore life could not exist. I will start granting that once someone tells me the conditions under which life can exist. What is the definition of life, for example? If it's just information processing, thinking, or something like that, there's a huge panoply of possibilities. They sound very science fiction-y, but then again, you're the one who's changing the parameters of the universe. The results are going to sound like they come from a science fiction novel. Sadly, we just don't know whether life could exist if the conditions of our universe were very different because we only see the universe that we see.
I don't know that it's true of any of them. I was presenting a hypothetical that if in some other universe with different content, a different in a different universe with those constants being changed some, it may be the case that something else exists and evolves and thinks that they are the special creation. I have no idea what they could change or what
Okay.
kind of life. It's not my
Yeah,
field at all.
so let me.
It's not.
Yeah. So
Okay.
sorry,
Go ahead.
Yeah, and sorry to cut you off. There were points when I thought you were done, but I think there's a slight delay, so I think that might be right. Yeah, so I don't think that's plausible, actually, for the specific instances of fine-tuning.
Creationists often argue that life only comes from life, as an argument that life can only come from God, which implies that God is a life form. God can allegedly exist without any universe at all, let alone a finely tuned one. So the assertion that life is impossible without a finely tuned universe is only true if God does not count as a life form. Christians love to cite John 3:16 that says that if you accept Jesus, you shall have eternal life, even after you die. If ghosts exist and count as a form of life, why would they need a finely tuned universe? Why would they be constrained by any physical parameters?
So take the cosmological constant, for example, which governs how rapidly the universe expands. If the cosmological constant were a little bit weaker, then much less than 1 millisecond after the Big Bang, everything would have collapsed in on itself.
Sure, but maybe some other constant could have also been different, such that life would be able to quickly arise before that collapse happened. Certainly, if there's an all-powerful God, that God would have the power to put life even into a quickly collapsing universe.
If it were a little bit stronger, everything would have flown apart much less than 1 millisecond after the Big Bang started.
And how would that make life impossible? I understand that atoms wouldn't be able to form the same way, but why assume that atoms are necessary for life? They certainly wouldn't be if there were an all-powerful God, so why would such a God need to finely tune the universe to such a precise cosmological constant? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.